She was left in a box to die, but a dog with no name found her first. Midnight rain lashed the outskirts of a forgotten town. Beneath a broken street lamp, a German shepherd limped down an alley, his ribs showing, fur clumped with mud, eyes scanning shadows not for enemies but for scraps. Once a canine hero, now discarded like an old badge, he had no name, no home, and no one left to command him. But that night, something pierced the wind. Not a siren. A cry. Faint. Fragile. It came from the woods, and without hesitation, the broken dog turned. What he found would not only change his fate, it would awaken a nation. This isn't a story about a miracle. It's about what happens when instinct, loyalty, and love refuse to die, even when the world forgets you. The rain didn't fall, it attacked. It came in sideways sheets, slapping against rusted fire escapes and corrugated metal dumpsters like fists. Wind howled through the narrow alleyway just outside the sleeping shell of a Midwestern town. It was the kind of night that made windows rattle, doors creak, and even the street lamps flicker as if unsure whether to keep trying. Through that alley, a shadow moved, broken, deliberate, soaked. Rook limped forward, head low, ribs showing through a coat matted with old dirt and new rain. His gait was uneven, as if every step came at a cost. The pads of his paws, once hardened for duty, were cracked from cold asphalt and time. Scars lined his right flank, one deep enough to cut through the fur permanently. The old injury from the explosion in Detroit still made his back leg drag slightly. His badge had been stripped, his partner reassigned. The unit had disbanded after the investigation. Too many headlines, too many ghosts. No more commands. No one had said goodbye. They just stopped calling his name. He passed a convenience store closed for the night, its neon sign buzzing weakly through the fogged glass. In the reflection, for just a moment, he saw himself just long enough to flinch away. There was no strength left to recognize what he had become. Just an outline, wet and hungry. Forgotten. A trash bin tipped over in the wind, spilling old paper cups and food wrappers into the puddles. Rook paused, sniffing with practiced motion. There was no pride in it anymore, only habit. A crushed sandwich. The remains of fried chicken bones. He pawed them apart, took a bite, and nearly choked before spitting it back out. Thunder cracked somewhere above the grain silos in the distance. Rook didn't startle. Storms didn't frighten him anymore. What could thunder do that betrayal hadn't? He moved again, crossing beneath a broken chain-link fence, squeezing through a gap lined with empty beer cans and mold. His fur snagged on a jagged wire, drawing a thin line of blood across his shoulder. He didn't yelp, didn't even blink. Pain was something old, something familiar. He found brief shelter beneath the overhang behind an abandoned auto shop, where the wind couldn't cut so sharp. There, Rook curled his aching body beside a stack of soaked cardboard boxes. Water dripped from his muzzle, and his breath came in slow, uneven clouds. He laid his head on his front paws and closed his eyes, but didn't sleep. He hadn't truly slept in months. Even now, in this half-forgotten corner of the world, instinct ruled him, ears alert, body poised. Somewhere deep within, the training still lived. The voice commands that once meant action, reward, purpose, search, guard, stay. But the voices were gone, just like the mission, just like the man he trusted. A car passed on the main road a few blocks away. He didn't look up. He didn't lift his head for headlights anymore. Instead, he watched the rain slide down the alley wall in long streaks, like it was trying to erase something. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn moaned low and lonely. It sounded tired, like it didn't want to arrive anywhere. And then, a noise. Not wind, not metal, not the scuttle of a raccoon or the scratch of rats behind the bins. It was softer, higher. A whimper? Rook's ears twitched. He lifted his head slowly. It came again, faint and sharp, barely cutting through the rain's roar. He stood, muscles stiff from cold, and turned his head toward the sound. Then stillness. He waited, nose in the air. There, a cry. Human. Infant. Rook blinked once. His breathing changed, shorter, quicker. Something in his chest pulled tight. He stepped forward into the downpour, driven not by hunger, not even by logic. It was reflex, the kind that bypassed memory and loyalty and pride. He moved down the alley, slipping in puddles, weaving between dumpsters and wrecked pallets. The cry came again, weaker this time. The wind almost swallowed it, but he'd heard enough wounded voices in his life to know when time was running out. He reached the end of the alley, where the woods pressed up against the edge of town like something feral trying to crawl back in. His breath turned to fog as he entered the brush, pushing aside wet branches and thorny vines that clung to him like ghosts. Rook didn't hesitate. Whatever waited ahead, however improbable, however irrational, was calling, and he would answer. Because when a canine loses his orders, his partner, his place, the only thing left to follow is instinct. And tonight, instinct had heard a cry. The wind howled like it was mourning something. It twisted through the trees, whistled across the rooftops, and roared down alleyways with a voice too wild to name. Rain lashed sideways stinging needles that turned every surface slick, every shadow slippery. The storm wasn't passing, it was staking its claim. And still, Rook moved. He limped past the last row of shuttered buildings, paws slapping against rain-soaked pavement. His coat clung to him like a second skin, weighed down by water and time. The cold didn't bite, it carved. His lungs burned with each breath. But something was pulling him now, something deeper than pain or hunger. That sound, faint, fractured, foreign. It had no place in a night like this. He paused beneath a flickering streetlight, head turning sharply to the left. There it was again, a thin, quivering cry, barely more than a thread of sound carried by the wind. But it pierced him like a bullet, not animal, not wind, not ghost. Baby. Rook's ears perked forward, trained and sharp despite the weight of the years. The noise came from beyond the alley, past the fence line, past the lot choked with bramble and half-buried tires, into the tree line that marked where the town forgot its borders. His breath shortened. Rain dripped from his snout. He took one step forward, then another. Each movement sent tremors through his back leg, the old injury flaring. But he didn't slow. The cry came again, this time weaker, shorter, desperate. A memory stirred in the back of his mind. A warehouse fire, a trapped civilian, the heat pressing in like a vice. He remembered pushing through smoke to reach the scream. This was the same, only smaller, only colder, only alone. He broke into a limp run, pushing past the fence through a gap he barely fit through. Thorns tore at his legs. He didn't feel them. The earth here was muddy, the scent of oil and pine heavy in the air. Broken branches cracked beneath his steps, and water pooled around exposed roots like veins in the soil. Lightning flashed briefly, revealing the forest edge like a snapshot. Then darkness again. The crying had stopped. Rook froze, chest heaving. He turned in slow circles, sniffing the air, listening for anything beneath the roar of the storm. For a terrifying second, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the endless churn of rain. And then, a rustle. He whipped his head toward it. There, tucked behind a fallen log and nearly hidden beneath a canopy of soaked leaves and branches, something small shivered. It wasn't crying anymore. It was too weak. Rook stepped closer. The shape was white, stained with brown and green. A foam box, cheap, thin, the kind used for groceries or discarded leftovers. Its lid was partially closed, weighed down by a branch. The scent hit him first. Sour milk, human skin, the metallic tinge of fear. He nosed the edge of the box gently. It moved. Inside, a newborn girl, no more than a few days old, lay, barely wrapped in a thin towel, soaked through and sticking to her fragile skin. Her lips were blue. Her hands trembled. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, so small it could be missed. Rook didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply stood there for a moment, soaked and silent, as something inside him shifted. He didn't know her name, didn't know how she got there, but it didn't matter. She was alone, and he knew what that meant. He nudged the box again, then gently gripped the corner between his teeth. The foam compressed under pressure. He didn't bite down. He held carefully, cautiously, and began to pull. The weight was awkward. The box scraped against roots and branches, occasionally catching in the brush, but Rook didn't stop. Inch by inch, he dragged it out of the thicket, his paws slipping in the mud. His muscles screamed in protest, his chest heaving with effort. The storm pushed against him like a wall. Rain blinded his eyes. Wind clawed at his ears. But he pulled. There were no sirens, no shouts, no flashlight beams cutting through the dark. Just him and her. By the time he cleared the woods and reached the edge of the overgrown lot, the box was soaked and sagging. The baby let out a small, hoarse sound. Not quite a cry. It was enough to make him push harder, dragging the box across gravel and asphalt toward the road that ran like a black ribbon through the town's edge. He stopped at the curb, body trembling, tongue hanging from exhaustion. And then he did the only thing left in him. He barked, once, then again, and again. The sound was rough, strained like it hadn't been used in weeks, but it came from somewhere deeper than voice. It came from instinct, from purpose, from the part of him that refused to let this child disappear into the storm like he had. Headlights passed in the distance, slow, uncertain, but they didn't stop. Still, he barked. Still he hoped. The box didn't belong there. It looked like an afterthought, discarded, forgotten, half-buried beneath a sprawl of slick brown leaves and snapped branches. Rainwater pooled in its corners. The white foam was stained the color of rot and earth, softened from exposure, warped at the edges like it had been there too long already. But it moved. Barely. A shiver. A tremble. A whisper of life. Rook stepped closer, muscles tight despite the cold. The wind ripped through the trees behind him like a second scream, but he stayed focused. His breath came out ragged. Water ran down the bridge of his nose and dripped from his chin. His ears flicked, catching every sound, every shift of branch, every rustle of wet underbrush. He lowered his snout and sniffed, and the scent hit him. Human. Infant. milk, cold, and something deeper, something feral, the scent of fear, not just from the baby, but from the absence of everything else. No warmth, no hands, no safety. This wasn't an accident. Someone had left her here. Rook nudged the side of the box with his nose. It gave a dull, hollow sound. Inside, a thin towel clung to the body of a newborn girl like tissue paper, soaked and transparent, offering no comfort. Her skin was ghostly pale, nearly bluish. Her lips parted slightly, barely managing a breath. Her tiny fingers curled inward, not in a fist, but as if grasping for something that wasn't there. She didn't cry. She couldn't anymore. Rook stared. There was no voice telling him what to do, no partner giving orders, no sirens, no collar around his neck. And yet, he knew. He didn't pause to process it, didn't think to bark or hesitate or wait for help that would never come. He stepped forward and carefully took the edge of the box in his mouth. The foam compressed under his teeth, not enough to crush, just enough to grip, just enough to carry. Then he began to pull. The mud clung to the bottom like a hand refusing to let go. Each tug was harder than the last. The box snagged on roots, caught on jagged twigs, slipped sideways and threatened to tip. Rook adjusted, bit down harder, shifted his weight, and dragged again. Inch by inch, he carved a path through wet underbrush and dead branches, leaving a muddy trail behind him like a wound in the earth. The rain didn't stop. If anything, it grew fiercer needles of cold stabbing against his side. Thunder boomed overhead. Lightning cracked, lighting the woods for a split second in ghostly white before returning everything to black. But Rook didn't stop. The pain in his hip flared again. That old injury scar tissue from an explosion he never got a medal for made his back leg spasm. He stumbled once, went down to one knee. Mud coated his chest. The box shifted. A muffled sound came from inside. A breath. A cough. A wet gasp. That was enough. He surged forward. By the time he reached the edge of the tree line, his sides were heaving. His mouth foamed from effort. The box bumped along behind him, its corners torn and damp. But it was still together, still holding, and inside, she was still alive. Rook climbed the shallow incline to the roadside, claws slipping against wet asphalt. He dropped the box just beyond the shoulder, under a flickering lamp whose bulb buzzed like it was trying to outlast the storm. Then he turned, positioned himself beside the box, and faced the road. It was empty, just a black ribbon stretched under the sky. But he waited. And then, with all the air he had left, he barked. The sound ripped from his throat, cracked, raw, and hoarse. It echoed off the buildings in the distance, swallowed by wind and rain. Still he barked again. And again. He stepped into the road. A car passed headlights, slicing through the storm like distant hope, but it didn't stop. Another followed, then another. They swerved around him. One honked. The box remained unseen behind him. But Rook stayed. When his voice gave out, he whined. When no one came, he circled the box, then lowered his trembling body around it, curling his spine protectively. His soaked fur flattened against the foam as he pressed in close. His breath warmed the plastic. His body blocked the wind. The rain stung his open eyes, but he refused to close them. There were no more orders. Only this, a life too small to fight, and a dog too broken to run. The road was slick with memory of storms, of stories, of people who once looked but never truly saw. Rook stood at its edge now, paws trembling, the foam box behind him bruised and dented from the journey through the woods. The wind screamed louder here, no longer broken by the trees. It swept across the open asphalt like something alive, biting into his ears, dragging his fur sideways. A car approached. He saw the faint glow, first 2 dots growing brighter, expanding into twin blades of light that cut through the curtain of rain. His ears perked. He took a step forward. He barked. The car didn't slow. It swerved slightly, tires hissing as it veered around him. The red of its taillights faded into the storm like a closing door. Then nothing. Rook barked again. Another set of lights appeared, then another. All passed, some faster, some slower. One even honked a short, annoyed burst that echoed through the empty dark. Not one stopped. To them he was just another stray. A hazard, a shadow with no meaning. They didn't see the box. They didn't see the baby. Rook turned back, nosed the box gently. Inside, Rowan stirred a whisper of motion beneath the soaked towel. Her lips were still pale. Her chest still barely moved, but she was alive. He barked again, louder this time. His throat tore with effort. It didn't matter. He barked for the cars, for the people behind their glass, dry and distracted. He barked like it was the only thing he could offer. Another flash of lightning, another rumble of thunder, and still no one came. The rain soaked deeper into his coat, turning his skin to ice. His limbs shook beneath him. The pain in his back leg had become a scream constant, angry. He shifted weight off it and leaned into the storm. He tried to bark once more, but this time only air came out. A rasp, a cough. His voice was gone. So he whined. It was a pitiful sound, thin and raw and cracking beneath the weight of something deeper than pain. It was the sound of a dog who knew what giving up looked like but wasn't ready to do it yet. Another car. Another missed chance. Rook stepped backward, teeth clenched around the edge of the box, and pulled it further from the road, just enough to keep it safe from tires and rain. Then he curled himself around it. His body shook uncontrollably now, not from fear, but from the cold settling deep in his bones. But he pressed in tighter, molding his thin frame to the side of the box. His rib cage rose and fell in stuttering rhythm. His heartbeat thundered beneath damp fur. The towel covering the baby was soaked through. His own body was the only warmth left. He laid his head gently across the top of the box, eyes half-lidded but alert, watching, waiting. Rain trickled down his snout, dripped from his whiskers, pooled around his paws. But he didn't move. A gust of wind lifted a corner of the towel. He used his snout to press it back down. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried everything. There were no more cars for a long time after that, no more headlights, no more hope. Just the hum of the storm, the flash of lightning, and the silence of a dog who had already been forgotten once, refusing to let it happen again. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The world had gone quiet in that cruel way it sometimes does after too much noise, like it was waiting to see if this moment would matter. Rook didn't close his eyes. He couldn't afford to. His vision blurred, but not from sleep. It was something deeper, a kind of surrender, but still not the kind that lets go, the kind that clings. If someone had seen them, really seen them, they would have understood. Not just a dog in a box in the rain, but a protector, stripped of title and home, choosing to fight without command. And a child abandoned by a world too busy to stop, cradled in the warmth of the last soul willing to stand guard. The road stretched on, endless and unkind. But Rook was no longer waiting to be rescued. He had made his choice. The dawn didn't break. It bled. A pale gray seeped across the sky like something bruised and tender, barely strong enough to lift the weight of night. The storm had passed, but it hadn't left gently. Puddles littered the roadside like shattered mirrors. Leaves clung to fences, windshields, boots. The world was soaked and silent, holding its breath. Eliza Monroe tightened her raincoat and stepped onto the cracked sidewalk that curved along her neighborhood's edge. Her boots splashed gently with each step. The air still smelled of iron and wet earth. She didn't usually walk this early anymore, not since retirement. But sleep had been thin lately. Memories did that, especially the ones that came without warning. The ones with blood and monitors and voices begging for one more breath. She shifted her umbrella, eyes scanning the familiar stretch of road she'd walked for nearly 30 years. The same trees, the same sagging mailbox on the corner, the same crooked bend where the street met the bypass. But something was different. At the far edge of the bend, near the shoulder of the road, a shape lay motionless. Eliza squinted, adjusting her glasses. It was hard to see clearly in the mist. At first she thought it was a heap of trash, a large bag, maybe, or roadkill. But something about it didn't sit right. It looked too deliberate, too still. She stepped off the sidewalk and into the grass, the cold seeping into her socks despite the boots. The wind had died, but the morning carried a strange hush, as if the world hadn't quite decided what came next. As she neared the figure, her breath caught. It wasn't a bag. It was a dog, a large one, German shepherd by the look of it, soaked to the bone, curled tightly into itself with a protective tension that wasn't sleep. His head rested atop something she couldn't yet see. His body shivered in shallow, uneven spasms. Dead? No, the eyes. They were open. Barely. She took another step, cautious but unafraid. "Hey, boy," she whispered, her voice thin in the quiet. The dog lifted his head just an inch, enough to see her, but didn't move further. His eyes met hers. There was no aggression, no warning, just a plea. Something ancient and unspoken in the way his ears stayed low, his breath fogging the box beneath his chin. Eliza blinked. A box? She took 2 more steps, and that's when she heard it. The sound was small, fractured. A cry. Not full-bodied, not strong, but real. Her heart stopped. Her hands began to shake before she even reached the box. She dropped her umbrella and fell to her knees on instinct. The wet grass soaked through her jeans, but she didn't feel it. She reached trembling fingers toward the foam. The German shepherd didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply moved aside, just enough, just barely. Eliza lifted the edge of the box's lid and saw the impossible. A newborn baby wrapped in a soaked towel. Her skin was ghostly pale, her lips faintly blue. Her arms barely moved, her chest rising in tiny, almost imperceptible breaths. A soft wheeze escaped her mouth, followed by another hoarse cry that seemed to take all the strength she had left. "Oh, God," Eliza whispered, one hand flying to her mouth. Her body surged into motion. Decades of training snapped into place like muscle memory. She reached for her phone with fingers that barely worked, rain still dripping from her sleeves. 911, she said aloud as if reminding herself. The line clicked. "Emergency services, what's your—" "I found a baby," Eliza gasped. "She's alive, but barely. She's freezing. There's a dog. He was guarding her. I think he saved her." The dispatcher began asking questions, But Eliza couldn't stop looking at the baby. She brushed the wet towel gently from the tiny face. The child turned weakly toward the warmth of her palm. "I need an ambulance. Now." "Ma'am, stay on the line. Help is on the way." "Is the baby breathing?" "Yes. Barely. She's hypothermic. Maybe hours out here." Her voice cracked. "And the dog? He's shaking. I think he hasn't moved all night." She looked at him again. The shepherd's eyes had drifted shut, but his ears still twitched with every word. His body was pressed so close to the box it was as if he'd tried to become part of it, like he had decided his life was worth less than the warmth he could give. Eliza reached out, placed a hand gently on his head. "You good boy," she whispered. "You absolute miracle." A moment passed. He didn't move, but his eyes opened again, just a little. She stayed like that, kneeling in the wet grass between a life that almost wasn't and the one who refused to let it end. Then, in the distance, sirens. Not loud, not urgent, but real. The sound of rescue. The dog's eyes flicked toward them, then back to Eliza. And for the first time in years, she felt something shift in her chest. Not the echo of trauma, but the beginning of hope. The foam lid sat askew now, rain sliding off its warped edges. Eliza hovered over the box, her knees wet from the soaked roadside grass, her breath quick and unsteady in the gray dawn air. Every instinct in her, once honed in trauma rooms, emergency bays, midnight deliveries gone sideways, was screaming. The baby was slipping, tiny lips, blue at the corners, tiny hands curled inward, unmoving. The towel, thin, soaked, and nearly useless, clung to the child's chest like wet gauze. Eliza could see the ribs, could feel the cold radiating upward like an accusation. She reached in gently, lifting the fragile weight into her arms, careful not to jostle her head or neck. The baby didn't cry, didn't stir, but then a sound. Not from the child, from behind her. Eliza turned her head just enough to see the German shepherd trying to rise. His front legs trembled, his back leg dragged slightly in the mud, but he pushed himself up anyway, eyes locked on the infant in her arms. He opened his mouth. A low, guttural rasp escaped. Then, a single bark. It cracked through the silence like glass. Not loud, not fierce, but full of effort, of desperation, of purpose. It was a bark that said, "She's alive. She's yours now. I did all I could." Eliza's eyes flooded instantly. "You held on," she whispered, cradling the baby closer to her chest. "You held on for her." The sirens grew louder now, curling around the bend in the road. Red and white lights flickered across the morning fog, reflecting in the wet pavement like distant fireworks. Tires hissed against water as the ambulance skidded to a stop nearby. EMTs jumped out. 2 men, 1 woman, gear already in hand. "Infant," Eliza called out. "Hypothermia, blue lips, shallow breathing, found abandoned inside this box. The dog kept her warm all night." The woman EMT rushed forward, taking the baby from Eliza's arms with clinical care but soft fingers. A heated blanket. A portable oxygen mask. Hands moving fast, but not panicked. "She's breathing barely. Pulse present," the EMT murmured. "We got time, but not much." The other EMTs brought out a transport incubator, snapping it open with practiced speed. They wrapped the baby in foil-like thermal layers, swaddled her tight, and slipped her inside the unit. A beeping monitor began to pulse. Eliza backed up, heart hammering. And then, almost as an afterthought, one of the medics turned and looked at the dog. "Is he yours?" "No," Eliza said softly. "He's no one's." The shepherd was lying down again now, legs folded, chin pressed to the grass. But his eyes hadn't left the baby. They were cloudy, heavy, but alert. The EMT frowned. "He's soaked to the bone. He needs care too. He's been here all night," Eliza said, her voice catching. "In the storm. He brought her out of the woods. Dragged the box, I think." "You're serious?" "Dead serious. He barked until someone stopped." The EMT crouched beside the dog, gently resting a hand on his side. Rook didn't growl, didn't shift. But a soft exhale escaped his nose as the warmth of human touch finally returned. "There's a vet on call downtown," the EMT said. "We'll call animal rescue." "No," Eliza said quickly. Her voice startled even her. "I mean, I'll take him. I have a car. Just help me get him into it." The medic paused, nodded. Together they moved slowly. Rook didn't resist. But every motion revealed the truth of his condition. Severe exhaustion, underweight, injury to the rear leg, exposure symptoms already taking hold. As they wrapped a dry blanket around him, the dog let out a low sigh. Neither pain nor relief. Just the sound of letting go for now. As they lifted him gently into the back of Eliza's hatchback, he turned his head, watched them close the incubator door, watched the baby disappear into the ambulance. His ears twitched. The door clicked shut. The engine started, and for the first time in hours, the baby cried again. It was small, weak, but it was a cry. Eliza stood beside her car, rain dripping off the edges of her coat, watching the ambulance drive away. The storm was truly gone now, leaving only puddles and silence. She looked into the back seat. The dog was lying still, wrapped in the rescue blanket, eyes closed but breathing steady. "You're a good boy," she whispered, resting her hand on the window. "You didn't give up on her, so I won't give up on you." The clouds began to break just enough to let a line of golden light peek through. Somewhere behind them, the road still shimmered with water. But ahead, the story was just beginning. The pediatric intensive care unit buzzed softly, like a song only machines could sing. Monitors beeped in slow, steady rhythm. Soft whirs of oxygen pumps hummed through transparent tubes. The lights were dim, but warm-washed in amber, not sterile white. A small incubator sat beneath a mobile heating unit in the center of the room. Inside it, wrapped in layers of warm cloth, nestled under sensors and swaddled in the hush of survival, lay a girl. Tiny, pale, breathing, alive. It had been 12 hours since Eliza handed her to the paramedics on the side of the road. 12 hours of waiting, of watching doctors push heated air into tiny lungs, massage fragile hands, fight back the tide of cold that had crept too far into infant bones. Now, the worst had passed. "She should not be here," Dr. Evan Cortez muttered under his breath, flipping through the vitals again for the third time in 15 minutes. Body temp on arrival was 89.1, cardiac rhythm irregular, early signs of pulmonary edema, and still, he looked through the incubator glass. "She's stable." Beside him, Nurse Laney exhaled, her voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the miracle. "Babies are resilient, but this is something else." They didn't speak for a moment. The only sound was the soft flutter of the heating unit. Then a quiet knock on the glass door. Eliza Monroe stood in the hallway, coat draped over one arm, her gray hair damp from earlier rain. In her other hand, she carried a paper coffee cup she hadn't touched. "Can I see her?" she asked, voice steady despite the weight in her chest. "Of course," Dr. Cortez said. "We've been meaning to talk with you." Eliza stepped inside slowly. The warmth of the room hit her first, not just in temperature but in spirit. Something had changed since that morning on the roadside. The air felt fuller now, softer. The doctor gestured toward the baby with quiet reverence. "We're not sure how long she was exposed. Judging from her temperature and oxygen levels, another hour, maybe 2, and she would have—" He paused, shook his head. But she didn't. Eliza stepped closer to the incubator. She leaned in, eyes wide behind her glasses. The baby's face was pink now, her lips no longer blue but rose-tinged and parted in quiet breaths. She twitched once, a sleepy half-frown curling over her brow. A miracle. No, the miracle. Eliza didn't notice the tear until it dropped onto her sleeve. "I want to name her," she whispered. The staff exchanged a glance, and the doctor nodded slowly. "She's officially a Jane Doe for now, but if you're fostering under emergency care, you can choose what to call her until the state intervenes." Eliza didn't hesitate. "Rowan," she said softly but surely. Dr. Cortez blinked. "That's unique. Why that name?" Eliza smiled faintly, her voice tight with emotion. "It's a tree, resilient, grows in places where nothing else does, and in folklore they say it wards off evil." She reached through the hand access port of the incubator and rested 2 fingers gently on the baby's cotton-swaddled arm. "You held on," she said to the child. "You found your own light in the dark." Rowan stirred. The doctor scribbled the name onto the temporary chart. As Eliza turned to leave, she paused at the door. "What about the dog?" "He's at Greenbrier Veterinary. We called ahead after you brought him in. They were shocked. Said he might have saved her life." "Might?" she said with a raised brow. Cortez chuckled. "Okay, no might about it. Without his body heat, without his presence, she wouldn't have lasted. They have his name listed as... They're just calling him Guardian." Seemed appropriate. Eliza didn't respond right away. The word hovered in her mind like a slow-moving comet. Guardian. Not a tag, not a title, a purpose. Before she stepped out, she looked back at the incubator one last time. One baby, one bark, one chance. She whispered into the room, "Thank you, Guardian, wherever you are." Across town, in a quiet veterinary clinic tucked behind a row of cottonwoods, the German shepherd lay curled in a recovery crate. His fur was still damp, his breathing slow, one leg wrapped, his ribs prominent beneath a blanket. But he was alive. And like her, he had made it through the night. Not because he had to, because he refused not to. The clinic was quiet in the way hospitals never were. No shouting, no alarms. No clatter of gurneys and crash carts. Just the hum of a ceiling vent, the soft padding of rubber soles on tile, and the rhythmic beeping of an oxygen monitor clipped gently to a paw that had seen too many winters. Rook lay on a clean fleece blanket in the corner of the exam room. His chest rose and fell unevenly. A thin IV line snaked from his foreleg to the bag of fluids overhead. His coat had been washed, mostly. The worst of the filth scrubbed free by hands that trembled when they touched his skin and saw what lay beneath. Scars. Too many for one lifetime. a jagged seam down his flank from an old bullet wound, the edges healed without care. Patches of fur missing where infection had taken root, bruising along the ribs that hinted at recent trauma, likely from the long night against the cold. His left hind leg still shook from nerve damage, aggravated by exhaustion and cold exposure. His lungs crackled with each breath. Fluid had begun to settle from the hours in the rain. But through it all, his eyes stayed open. Dr. Natalie Quinn, the attending vet, crouched at his side. Her fingers moved carefully over his spine, tracing each vertebrae with the reverence of someone reading a history book written in flesh. "I don't know how you made it through that storm," she murmured, gently palpating his chest. "Let alone carried a box and kept her warm." Rook didn't move, but his ears twitched at the sound of her voice. Dr. Quinn motioned to her assistant. "Let's run a chest X-ray. I'm concerned about pneumonia setting in, and we'll need to start him on antibiotics, IV drip, and pain management immediately." The assistant hesitated. Should we sedate him first?" Quinn looked at Rook. He was watching the door. Not them, not the light overhead. The door. Every time it creaked, every time footsteps echoed in the hallway. His eyes locked on it, his body tensed as if expecting, hoping for someone to come through. Not a vet, not a rescuer, not even food. Her, Rowan. He didn't know her name, but he knew her presence, knew her breath, her scent, her sound. He had memorized her every twitch that night under the storm. The baby had become an imprint, something fixed in him like muscle memory. He was scanning for her, even now. "I don't think he'll need sedating," Quinn said quietly, still watching his eyes. "He's too tired to fight us, but not too tired to care." They ran the X-rays, worked quietly around him. He never growled, never snapped. He flinched at the bright light, coughed through the cold mist of oxygen, but he didn't resist. His eyes would flutter closed for moments, then snap open at the smallest sound. When they lifted his paw to insert another catheter, he didn't protest. But when someone bumped the doorframe by accident, his head lifted sharply, alert, scanning, hoping. Quinn placed a warm compress gently over his shoulder. "Who are you looking for, old boy?" she asked softly. But she already knew. The scans confirmed their fears: early-stage pneumonia, likely from prolonged exposure, severe malnutrition, a previous gunshot wound that had never been properly treated, and yet his heart rate was strong, his responses sharp, his gaze unshaken. Quinn scribbled her notes, then paused. On the chart, the name still read, "Unknown Male, German Shepherd Mix." She crossed it out, wrote, "Guardian," because that's what the news was already calling him. Because no one had come forward to claim him. Because in every step he took, even now, he guarded something. Not territory, not himself, but someone smaller. Someone who couldn't yet speak, but had somehow reached deep into him and pulled something unbreakable from a body that had every reason to give up. He watched the door again. It didn't open. But still he watched. Quinn set her pen down, walked back over and sat beside him. She rested a gentle hand on the side of his face, just beneath the scar near his ear. "You didn't need orders, did you?" she whispered. "You didn't wait for permission." His eyes flicked to hers, then back to the door. He was listening. Quinn blinked against a sudden heat in her throat. "We're going to take care of you now. But I think you already know what it means to save a life." Rook shifted slightly, just enough to press his muzzle into the blanket. But even as his eyes closed for a moment, one ear remained perked, waiting, just in case the baby cried. just in case she came through the door. Because broken or not, wounded or not, he hadn't stopped being what the world had forgotten he was, a guardian. The papers were thin, 4 pages, stapled in the corner, slightly crinkled from Eliza's nervous grip, black ink on government letterhead, the kind she used to file a dozen times a week as a nurse, always for someone else, never like this. She stood at the counter of the Department of Child and Family Services, her scarf still damp around her neck, a to-go cup of cold coffee at her side, and the weight of 2 lives, 1 human, one not resting in her chest like a secret. The clerk looked over the form, blinked, then looked again. "You're requesting emergency temporary custody of the infant? And of the dog?" "Yes," Eliza said without hesitation. "Both." The woman blinked again, glancing over her shoulder as if this wasn't in the handbook. "The child, I understand. But the animal—" Eliza leaned forward, her voice calm but resolute. "They came together. He protected her, when no one else did. She breathes because of him. So if one of them goes somewhere, the other comes too." A pause. The woman stared at her, the silence stretching. Then she nodded and stamped the forms. Approved. That afternoon, the house on Sycamore Street, small, quiet, lined with ivy, opened its door to 2 souls who didn't belong anywhere else. Eliza carried Rowan inside first, nestled in a warm blanket donated by the hospital. The baby was still fragile but stable. Her cheeks had color again. Her breath was steady. Her eyelids fluttered when light hit her face. And once, for half a second, she reached upward into the air like she remembered the storm and wanted to push it away. The bassinet sat waiting by the front window, near the radiator. Eliza placed her gently inside, adjusting the blanket, brushing a finger along her impossibly small knuckles. Then she turned. "Okay," she murmured. "Your turn." Rook stood hesitantly in the open doorway, a clean bandage wrapped around his hind leg, the fur along his spine still damp in places from the bath he'd endured at the clinic. His head was low. One paw hovered slightly off the ground. He didn't move. Eliza crouched, patting the hardwood floor softly. "Come on, boy. You've earned dry floors." Rook looked past her, toward the bassinet. Then he stepped forward. His nails clicked softly against the entryway tile, then the wood floor, slow and unsure, like he'd never been allowed past a threshold before. He sniffed at the corner of the rug, paused near the coat rack. Then, as if pulled by gravity itself, he crossed the living room and lay down beside the bassinet. He didn't make a sound. He just placed his head near its edge, close enough to feel her warmth. His body curled inward, a silent orbit around the girl he had saved. Eliza stood for a moment, watching them both. A newborn with no name in the system, and a dog who had been erased by it. 2 without a place. She pulled the throw blanket off the couch and laid it gently over Rook's back. His eyes flicked up to her, not startled, not fearful, grateful. "I know," she whispered, fingers grazing the fur just above his ear. "It's not forever." She didn't say it to him. She said it to herself. That night, Eliza sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the digital clock on the nightstand. 11:08 p.m. Rain tapped against the windows again, softer this time. A spring drizzle, not a storm. Somewhere down the hall, a baby sighed in her sleep. And just outside the bedroom door, a dog shifted slightly, his body planted between bassinet and hallway, like he was born there. Eliza exhaled slowly, leaning back against the pillows. "Just until the world makes sense again," she murmured, as if repeating it could make it true. But some part of her already knew. This wasn't temporary. Not really. Not when a nameless child found a heartbeat because of a nameless dog. Not when fate tied their survival into a single thread, one that refused to snap. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed faintly, then disappeared. The wind moved softly through the trees, and inside, for the first time in a long while, there was peace. The fire cracked softly in the hearth, its glow dancing across the walls like a memory too shy to stay still. The living room, usually untouched at night, had become a sanctuary, not grand, not arranged, but intentional. Eliza moved slowly, her arms wrapped around a folded blanket, eyes fixed on the small white crib tucked close to the fireplace. It had taken her all afternoon to reassemble it piece by piece from the attic, where dust and time had buried it beneath old coats and unopened boxes labeled Nate's Winter Gear. She didn't let herself open those boxes, not tonight. The crib was clean now, washed, sanded where the wood had splintered. A new mattress, 2 folded burp cloths, a pale green knitted rabbit sitting in the corner. And inside, nestled between warmth and woven cotton, lay Rowan. Her skin no longer had the cold gray cast of the first night. The pink had returned to her cheeks, and her breathing came in steady rises, small and perfect. Her fingers twitched now and then, curling around invisible threads. She made no sound, not yet. But she was present in the way the air itself seemed to pause around her. Eliza knelt beside the crib and rested a hand gently over Rowan's middle. A heartbeat tapped beneath her palm. So small, so fragile, so here. From across the room, the soft shuffle of claws tapped faintly on wood. Eliza looked up. Rook stood at the edge of the carpet, head tilted slightly, waiting. Always waiting. "Come," she whispered. He didn't need to be told twice. He crossed the room without a sound and lay down beside the crib, one side pressed close to its base, his chin resting on his front paws. He exhaled once long and slow and closed his eyes, but not for sleep, only for stillness. The fire flickered, casting shadows that moved over the curve of his back, the ridges of old scars, the gentleness of a frame once built for battle now curled into service again, quiet and wordless. Eliza stayed for a while, seated on the couch nearby, just watching. She didn't reach for a book, didn't turn on the television. She simply sat. Every now and then Rowan would shift, a small grunt, a quick breath, and Rook would stir. He never rose, he didn't whine. He would lift his head slightly, lean forward, and nudge the wooden leg of the crib with the tip of his nose, just enough to cause a gentle motion, a faint rock. Rowan would sigh again, and settle. Eliza smiled. "You really are watching her, aren't you?" she whispered. "Like it's your mission." Rook didn't move, but she knew he heard her. The nights came in slow now. Not the rush of sleep from exhaustion, but the stretch of time that unfolded only when something sacred was happening. Healing, maybe. Or remembrance. It happened again around 2:13 a.m. Rowan fussed, not a cry, just a short gasp followed by a restless kick. Eliza woke with a start from the armchair, her back aching. But before she could even stand, Rook was there. He rose, moved one paw closer, and pressed his nose gently against the side of the crib again. Then he let out a low, almost inaudible huff warm air into the wood slats. Rowan stilled, like she recognized it, like she remembered him. Eliza didn't move, just watched. Her eyes stung not from sleep, but from the quiet way trust was building before her. Unscripted, unearned, undeniable. By the fifth night, it had become ritual. Rowan lay in the crib, tucked in a sleep sack with a crocheted hat too big for her head. Rook beside her, always on the same side, sometimes with his paw pressed against the base, sometimes with his chin close enough to feel the warmth coming through the wood, and Eliza, no longer in the armchair, but on a blanket on the floor nearby. Because somehow, sitting close to them both made the house feel less like a museum and more like a heartbeat. One night, just after midnight, thunder rolled in the distance. Rowan startled awake, her lips puckering. A soft sound escaped her. Rook rose instantly. But this time he didn't just nudge the crib. He placed his front paws against the edge and stood slightly, raising his head over the top. Then, with the gentlest motion Eliza had ever seen in her life, he pressed his nose against Rowan's forehead. And the baby stilled, just like that. Just knew. Eliza covered her mouth with her hand, her chest tight. She had seen triage units, last breaths, first cries, goodbyes etched into hospital hallways. But nothing, not even decades of service, prepared her for the moment when a wounded dog became more than protector. He became peace. Later that week, when the social worker called to check in, she asked, "Do you still want this to be temporary?" Eliza hesitated. She looked down at Rowan, gurgling softly in her arms. Then at Rook, lying at their feet, eyes half-lidded but alert. And she answered, almost to herself, "Let's just see where this goes." Because for now, this was home, and it didn't need to make sense to be real. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind that fills the room when everyone is asleep, but the wrong kind, the kind that presses in too hard, stretches too long, the kind that makes the air feel suddenly heavier. Rook had been asleep beside the crib, as he always was. His body curled into the same protective curve, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. The fire had burned low, down to ember, painting the walls in soft orange pulses. Outside, wind nudged the window panes gently, like the ghost of the storm that once changed everything. Then something shifted. He felt it before he opened his eyes. A stillness in the space he guarded, a difference in the temperature of breath, and the absence of sound. Rook's ears snapped forward. His eyes opened, fully alert. Rowan wasn't moving. He pushed up on trembling legs, stepping closer to the crib. His nose touched her cheek, cold, too cold, her lips tinged blue, her skin pale again, like that first night. Her chest wasn't rising. Rook froze for half a second. Then the training kicked in, not police training, not tactical, something older, something instinctual. Protect, alert, save. He barked, once, loud, then again, sharper, more frantic. He turned and ran, paws skidding on the floor, launching himself down the hallway where Eliza lay asleep in her room, door cracked open. He reached her bedside and leapt with full weight landing on the mattress, pulling at the blanket with his teeth, pawing at her shoulder with growing desperation. A whimper, a bark, a howl that bordered on broken. Eliza jerked awake, heart slamming against her ribs. "Rook? What?" The tone in his bark stopped her. It wasn't warning. It was panic, real, raw. He darted out the door, looked back once. She followed. Fast, down the hall, into the living room. And then she saw. "Rowan!" The baby was still, lips blue, limbs limp inside the sleep sack. "No, no, no, no." Eliza didn't pause. She scooped Rowan up, laid her flat on the blanket by the fireplace, fingers trembling as they peeled back layers. She checked for breath. None. Pulse faint. Barely there. She dropped to her knees. CPR. She hadn't done this in years, but it lived in her bones. She positioned her fingers, 2 small compressions, mouth to mouth. Again, count. Listen. Come on, baby girl. Come back to me, she whispered through clenched teeth. Rook paced nearby, barking again, one short burst every few seconds, like he couldn't sit still while her life slipped through them. Eliza grabbed her phone with one hand, pressed speakerphone with the heel of her palm. 911, she gasped. Infant 1 month, no breathing, cold skin. I'm administering CPR. We're at 216 Sycamore, please hurry. Help is on the way, the dispatcher said. Keep compression steady, don't stop. Eliza didn't. Not once. She counted, pressed, breathed, prayed. And then a sound, a sharp, wet gasp. Rowan's chest hitched. Eliza froze, waited. Another gasp. Then a thin, broken cry, small and strained, but alive. Oh, thank God, Eliza breathed, scooping Rowan into her arms, wrapping the baby against her chest as her body shook from adrenaline and release. Rook whimpered, stepping forward, nudging the back of Eliza's leg with his nose as if asking, Is she okay? She's here, Eliza whispered. You got me here in time. She looked at him then, really looked. His ears were back, his breath shallow, his body tense like it had absorbed the terror itself. And still he stood between her and the door, between life and whatever had just tried to take it. Moments later, the sirens pierced the night. An ambulance pulled up. Paramedics flooded in, assessed the situation with urgency and awe. She's stabilized now, one of them said, glancing at the monitor. But another minute. God! As they lifted Rowan into the carrier, the medic paused, pointed to Rook. Was it the dog? Eliza nodded, voice catching. He knew. He woke me. He wouldn't let me sleep through it. The paramedic looked stunned. He saved her again. This time no one laughed or called it a miracle lightly. This time they understood. At the hospital, as machines hummed and nurses whispered, Eliza sat beside the crib in the pediatric ER. One hand held Rowan's fingers. The other rested on the thick fur of the shepherd lying silently beside her. She looked down at him. You did it again, she said, tears falling silently. Rook didn't move, but his eyes stayed open, still watching her, still watching them, still guarding the space where breath returned. The hallway outside the pediatric wing smelled like antiseptic and coffee left too long on a burner. Somewhere nearby, a vending machine hummed with indifference, and fluorescent lights flickered like they, too, were tired of bearing witness. Eliza sat in the corner of the consultation room, coat draped over her lap, hands still shaking from adrenaline that hadn't found a place to settle. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty bun, and her reading glasses hung forgotten on the collar of her shirt. Across from her, a doctor reviewed a chart expression tight, tone clinical, but something in his voice had shifted, like he wasn't just talking about vitals anymore. Infant anaphylaxis this severe in someone her age is incredibly rare, Dr. Cortez said, tapping the folder in his lap. We believe it was a reaction to a trace protein in the formula she was given. Nothing anyone could have predicted. Eliza nodded slowly, eyes glassy. She didn't trust her voice yet. The respiratory arrest came fast. Sudden bronchoconstriction, oxygen drop, then full apnea. If you had found her even 60 seconds later, he stopped himself. It would have been too late. That silence again, but not the peaceful kind. She's stable now, he added, and we've switched her to hypoallergenic feeding. We'll monitor for the next 48 hours, but her vitals are good. Eliza closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough for the weight of that sentence. It would have been too late to echo inside her. When she opened them again, her voice cracked out of her like it had broken its own shell. "I didn't hear her," she said. "I was down the hall, and I didn't hear her." Dr. Cortez looked at her gently. But he did. She turned her head. Through the glass pane of the room, Rook lay curled beside the base of Rowan's hospital crib. His eyes were open, not anxious, just present. His head lifted every time the monitors beeped, every time a nurse passed. He didn't rest, not fully, not while she was still recovering. "He came for me," Eliza whispered, "jumped on my bed, pulled the blanket, barked like the world was ending." In his mind, the doctor said quietly. It was. Eliza's eyes welled again, not from panic this time, but from reverence, gratitude in its rawest, most aching form. She stood slowly and moved toward the window. Rook's ears perked as her shadow reached the floor near his paws. He looked up. Their eyes met. "He didn't just save her once," she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. Her voice broke. "He's still saving her." An hour later, Rowan was sleeping soundly, her little chest rising with ease, fingers curled beside her cheek like petals. The oxygen had been removed, the feeding tube taken out. Her body, so small and once fragile, had pushed back against the worst of it. Eliza sat beside her crib, her hand gently stroking the soft edge of the blanket. Rook was beside her chair now, head resting on his paws. He hadn't left her side since they'd arrived. A nurse entered quietly with a clipboard. "We're updating her chart. We need a note on who first alerted you to the emergency." "The dog?" Eliza gave a soft laugh through her exhaustion. "You can just write. He knew." The nurse tilted her head. "Sorry?" Eliza looked down at Rook. No one trained him for this. No one told him what to do. But he knew. Without words, without hesitation. The nurse nodded, wrote something down, left quietly. The room fell still again. Rowan stirred slightly. Eliza whispered, "He's the only reason she's alive." That night, after the last of the tests and after the staff cleared out, Eliza leaned back in her chair, her legs tucked up underneath her. She reached down and ran a hand through Rook's fur. It was coarse, still patchy in places, but warm. "I don't know what you are," she murmured, tears pricking again. "A soldier, a guardian, an angel with teeth and scars. But whatever you are, she's here because of you." Rook looked up. She smiled, weak and full of awe. "I hear them talk about fate sometimes," she said, watching Rowan sleep, "about how things happen for a reason. But this doesn't feel like fate. This feels like choice." Rook blinked slowly. "You chose her." The room grew quiet again, wrapped in the hum of monitors and the steady breath of a baby who had come too close to being lost. And beside her, the one who made sure she wasn't. It started with one photo, a medic kneeling beside a white ambulance, cradling a newborn wrapped in thermal blankets. Behind him, barely in frame, a German shepherd stood motionless in the rain-soaked, scarred ribs showing beneath fur clumped from storm water. His eyes weren't on the camera. They were on the baby. The caption was simple. Guardian dog saves abandoned infant in midnight storm. At 6:14 a.m., it was shared by a local paramedic's wife. By 9:27 a.m., it had 14,000 shares. By noon, it was everywhere. Talk shows quoted it. News anchors called it unbelievable. Veterinary networks labeled the shepherd a natural trauma responder. Human interest podcasts scrambled for interviews. People cried in parking lots watching the clip of Rook pacing as EMTs worked on the baby. They didn't know her name yet, or his, but they didn't need to. All they saw was loyalty in the purest form. At the heart of it all, Eliza sat in a vinyl chair in Rowan's hospital room, scrolling through her phone in disbelief. Article after article, thumbnail after thumbnail. The same story, spun 100 ways. Storm Guardian. The dog that waited. Four-legged miracle. She watched a video someone had uploaded from the emergency scene grainy, taken from inside a car that had finally stopped. The camera shook as it captured Rook standing by the foam box, barking hoarsely as rain drenched them both. A moment later, a figure her rushed into frame. She remembered that moment. The panic, the weight of the box, the baby's silence. But in the video, what stood out most was Rook's posture. Unmoving, unshaken, utterly focused on the life beside him. A quiet sort of bravery no medal could explain. Rowan stirred softly in her crib beside Eliza. Her face had filled out ever so slightly, her lips pink now, her breath gentle. She wore a pale yellow beanie, knitted that morning by a hospital volunteer who had read about her story. Eliza reached out and touched the baby's arm. "I guess you're famous now, little one," she whispered. Rowan made a small cooing sound in her sleep, her hand flexing against the blanket. Eliza turned to Rook, curled beneath the window. He wasn't watching the screen. He wasn't interested in the headlines. His eyes were on the crib. Every time Rowan shifted, Rook's ears moved. When she whimpered, he stood. When she settled, he did too. He didn't care that the world had noticed him, that someone had set up a GoFundMe in his name, that a popular news outlet had dubbed him America's dog. None of it mattered. Only she did. By late afternoon, the hospital lobby had filled with more press than patients. Reporters waited with notepads and lenses and soft, calculated smiles. Some asked for quotes. Others asked for exclusives. A few wanted Rook to wear a vest pose for a promotional spot on behalf of a pet food company. Eliza declined them all. She passed through the crowd quietly, carrying Rowan against her chest, Rook padding close behind her. Every camera that flashed caught the same moment. An infant nestled beneath Eliza's chin, and a dog, protective and silent, walking as if the flash of light was just thunder in a different disguise. She didn't stop for interviews. She didn't need to. The photo had already said enough. That night, back at home, Eliza opened the sliding door to the backyard and let Rook step out onto the porch. He walked slowly, sniffing the wind, scanning the yard like something might still be lurking. Then he lay down under the porch light and rested his chin on his front paws. Inside, Eliza placed Rowan in the crib beside the fireplace once more. The same place where they had built their rhythm. The same place where peace had begun. She stood over the crib for a long time, fingers gently brushing the edge. "You know what they don't see?" she whispered. Rook turned his head slightly from the porch, listening. "They don't see what you do at 3 a.m. when she fusses and you nudge her back to sleep. They don't see how you watch the door when a car pulls up, or how you lie just close enough to the crib to feel her breathing." She knelt beside him at the threshold, the cool night wind whispering around them. "All those headlines," she said, "but the real miracle isn't what you did." She looked him in the eye. "It's that you stayed." Rook didn't move, but he didn't need to, because some loyalty doesn't require language, some devotion doesn't care about cameras, and some stories never make it into words. They just breathe beside the crib, night after night, heartbeat by heartbeat. By the end of the week, the mailbox on Sycamore Street was overflowing, not with bills or advertisements, but with envelopes scrawled in messy, hopeful handwriting from strangers. Letters came from every state, some short, some barely legible, others long and trembling with story. "My daughter was saved by a rescue dog, too. We named our puppy Guardian after yours. Please give this to the woman who didn't turn away." There were checks, too, gift cards to grocery stores, packages of baby clothes and chew toys, sometimes in the same box. Eliza stood at the kitchen table, slicing them open one by one, Rowan swaddled against her chest in a soft sling, her tiny hand curled like a seashell against Eliza's collarbone. On the floor beside her, Rook slept, not fully, but in the way guardians do, half resting, half watching. His ears twitched with every crinkle of a package, but his eyes didn't lift unless Rowan stirred. Outside, a car pulled up, then another, and another. By the time Eliza opened the door, there were 3 families gathered on the walkway too, with toddlers in hand. One woman holding a container of homemade soup like it was an offering. They didn't ask to come inside, they just wanted to say thank you. That became the rhythm. Every morning, someone left something at the gate: diapers, hand-knit blankets, cans of dog food, sometimes notes folded like prayers. "You remind us what good looks like." The doorbell rang more in 1 week than it had in 5 years. Local volunteers began stopping by, offering help with laundry, groceries, yard work. One teenager from the high school offered to build a small ramp for Rook when she noticed his hind legs still struggled on the steps. She brought her father and tools, and within hours, a ramp curved down from the porch to the grass like it had always belonged there. Every visitor asked the same question, though most didn't say it aloud. "Are you keeping them?" Eliza never answered directly, because she didn't know. Not yet. Inside the house, the world remained quiet, sacred. Rook refused to leave Rowan's side. When guests came too close, his body would stiffen, not aggressive, just alert, protective. Once, a local reporter asked if he could pose Rook for a few shots, maybe even put a red bow around his collar, for the feel-good angle. Eliza looked him dead in the eye and said, "He's not a mascot, he's a soldier." They didn't come back. One afternoon, while folding donated onesies on the couch, Eliza caught herself staring too long at the empty wall above the fireplace. It had always been bare, a blank space, once meant for family portraits that never happened. She imagined it now, not with gold frames, not a studio photo, just a moment caught by accident. Rowan in her crib, hand open toward the air. Rook curled beside her, eyes closed, but ears alert. Peace, untrained, unstaged, real. And for the first time, she allowed the thought to come fully. What if this isn't temporary? What if this is where we begin again? Later that evening, the sun slipped low over the fence, turning the backyard into a tapestry of soft oranges and fading blues. Rowan slept in the bassinet by the window, her breathing steady. Eliza stood at the kitchen sink, watching the light shift on the walls. She reached for a pen, opened the form the social worker had left tucked into her folder during their last visit. "Do you intend to pursue long-term placement?" She didn't check a box yet, just stared at it, and then looked at Rook, who was lying near the crib again, tail occasionally thumping when Rowan sighed in her sleep. He had no papers, no official name, no tags or records or clean pedigree, but he had presence, he had purpose, and somehow that had become enough. That night, Eliza whispered to the empty living room as she turned off the last light, "If you're both staying, I'll need to build a bigger world." And in the shadows, Rook lifted his head, blinked once, and went back to watching her sleep. Because crowds come and go, headlines fade, but a vow? A vow is what stays when the noise dies down. The morning light came gently, as if it knew. It poured through the window in thin, golden ribbons, casting soft shapes across the living room floor, the edge of a blanket, the curve of a wooden crib, the worn outlines of a dog's paw prints in the hardwood. Outside, bird song threaded through the air like something hesitant but healing. It was the kind of morning that didn't demand attention. It just offered warmth. Eliza stood in the kitchen barefoot, pouring water into the kettle. The house was quiet in that special way only homes with infants ever are, half holding its breath, half savoring the stillness before the next soft cry. She glanced toward the fireplace, where Rowan lay nestled in her crib. 6 weeks old now, stronger, sleeping longer, gaining weight. Her cheeks had filled in, round and pink. Her arms, once barely visible beneath swaddles, now wiggled free with a strength that made Eliza smile. And then there was Rook, still at her side. Always. He had taken to starting each day with a patrol of the house room by room, paw by paw, before settling once again beside Rowan's crib. Not guarding, exactly. Not hovering, just being there. That morning, Eliza didn't notice when he disappeared into the hallway. She only noticed the sound, a soft thump, then a curious wet squeak, followed by something else, a sound she hadn't heard before. At first, she thought it was a hiccup, a gurgle, the sort of breathy noise babies make when adjusting to the space they occupy. But then it came again, clearer, higher, lighter. A laugh. Eliza dropped the dish towel in her hands. She stepped into the living room, heart fluttering, unsure of what she'd find, and froze. Rook stood near the crib, his tail swaying gently side to side. In front of him, on the floor, was a small red plush ball, slightly chewed, faded, one of the first toys someone had donated in a box marked, "For Rowan," or the dog whoever plays with it first. Apparently, Rook had decided. With deliberate gentleness, he nudged the ball forward with his nose. It rolled toward the crib, bumping against the wooden leg. Rowan let out another burst of laughter, this time unmistakable, a full-bodied, hiccupy, bubbling sound that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than lungs. Eliza pressed a hand to her chest. Rowan flailed her arms excitedly, the way babies do when something delights them beyond understanding. Her little fists danced in the air. Her face lit up, her gums bare and shining in a smile so pure it made Eliza's knees soften. Rook stepped closer. paused, then nudged the ball again. Another giggle, louder now. This time Rowan kicked her feet. Her whole body wriggled in joy. Rook tilted his head, one ear cocked. Then, for no one's benefit at all, he lay down and pushed the ball gently back and forth with his paw, never leaving the crib's side. Eliza sank to her knees beside the scene. Not out of exhaustion, but awe. The kind that rooted her right to the floor. "You're already a team," she whispered, voice barely holding steady. Before she could even talk. She reached into the crib and touched Rowan's hand. The baby's fingers curled instinctively around her thumb, but her eyes stayed fixed on the dog, as if he were the sun. And in a way, he was. He had been her shelter, her siren, her warmth. And now he was her joy. Eliza looked at him, really looked. His scars had begun to fade beneath new fur. His ribs were less pronounced. The limp in his back leg was still there, but softer, more manageable. His eyes had that same watchfulness, but the tension behind them had begun to ease. He wasn't waiting for the next emergency anymore. He was simply present, fully, completely. And this laugh, this tiny sound from a girl who should never have survived the cold felt like the first true page of something unwritten. Later that day, Eliza jotted something down in her old leather-bound journal. She hadn't touched it in years, not since Nathan passed, but today felt worthy. She wrote, March 14th. Rook made her laugh, not smile, laugh. It sounded like sunrise. He didn't bark, didn't need to. He knew exactly what she needed, just like he did in the rain, just like he always will. I don't know what they were before this, but I know what they are now. They're not surviving anymore. They're living. She closed the journal and looked across the room where Rowan slept again, one fist curled around the plush ball now resting beside her. And just below, Rook eyes half closed, tail tapping once against the floor, content in the quiet. Some guardians wear badges, others wear scars, but the ones who matter most, they bring laughter into places that forgot how to hold it, and never once ask for anything in return. The breeze that rolled through the town square carried the scent of kettle corn, face paint, and early spring, soft and fragrant, with a whisper of thawed earth and blooming things. Streamers flapped between lampposts, woven with names of local sponsors and hand-drawn hearts colored in by children. The old community fountain, dormant all winter, now shimmered in sunlit spray behind a large banner that read, Hearts for Hope, because every life deserves a second chance. Stalls lined the sidewalk, local bakers, artists, rescue centers. There was laughter, music, the squeals of toddlers chasing balloons, and in the center of it all, just beside the stage set for speeches and songs, sat a booth surrounded by a small sea of people. That was where Rook lay, his coat now clean, brushed to a muted sheen, though his scars still told their quiet stories. A blue vest clung softly to his body, not restrictive, not authoritative, just enough to show the words carefully stitched across the back. Miracle Dog. Around his booth, children knelt like disciples before a gentle oracle. Some reached to pet him. Others held crayon drawings of him and Rowan, proud like they'd captured something sacred. And he was calm, still, alert but unbothered, not panting, not pacing, just grounded. His eyes scanned the crowd, but always circled back to the small form sitting a few feet away, in Eliza's lap, beneath a canopy of hearts drawn in chalk. Rowan was in a pale yellow onesie, her head still lolling when she giggled too hard, which she did often today. A small pink sun hat flopped over one eye. She was holding a toy microphone someone had handed her, not knowing she couldn't talk yet, and not realizing it didn't matter. She waved it in the air like a queen saluting her people. The crowd loved it. So did Rook. Every time she squealed with delight, his ears would twitch, eyes softening. "She's a ham," Eliza chuckled, bouncing her gently. "I should be worried." A woman beside her, one of the event organizers, smiled, eyes glistening. "I think we all needed a day like this. And a story like yours." Eliza nodded, but didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to Rook again. "He saved her twice," she said, more to herself. "And he never asks for anything. Not food, not attention. He just stays." The organizer knelt beside Rowan. "She's lucky." "No," Eliza replied. "We're lucky." The mayor took the stage shortly after noon, pausing to adjust the mic. "Today's about hope," he began, voice slightly raspy over the PA system. "And the quiet kind of heroism that doesn't carry a badge or wear a cape, but waits in storms, watches in silence, and somehow just knows who needs saving." People applauded. He gestured toward the booth. "To the dog they call Guardian, Miracle, or just Rook." Another round of clapping, louder this time. Rook didn't react much, but he turned toward Rowan. She clapped too, not because she understood speeches, but because Rook was looking at her. Later, as the fundraiser reached its golden hour lull, someone brought Rook a new vest, this one a soft navy with patches from various departments. Canine units, rescue shelters, a paw print stitched in silver thread. Children were invited to place hand-cut hearts onto a display board near him, each bearing a name. A pet lost and remembered, a child adopted, a foster who found there forever. Eliza stood before it for a long while, Rowan asleep against her chest. When she added her own, she simply wrote, "Rook found her, and she found all of us." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows behind the vendor tents and fading sidewalk chalk, a local singer performed an acoustic version of "You'll Never Walk Alone." It wasn't rehearsed, but it felt right. Parents swayed with their children. Volunteers sat on curb edges, eating hot dogs and watching the crowd instead of the stage. And Rook, finally rising from his spot, walked slowly to where Eliza now sat cross-legged on the grass, Rowan cradled in her lap. He rested his head beside her. The baby stirred. One tiny hand reached out, touched fur, gripped it, and didn't let go. Some moments in life don't ask for cameras or applause or banners. They simply exist. In a heartbeat, a breeze, a giggle on the wind, Eliza looked at them. The unlikely pair, survivor and sentinel, flesh and fur, breath and bark. "I don't know what we are yet," she whispered to no one in particular, "but I know what we're not." She paused, tears rising without urgency. "We're not alone anymore." The last light of day melted into a warm amber haze, painting the town square in soft gold and long shadows. Children still chased bubbles drifting through the air. A barbershop quartet began singing near the fountain, their harmony wrapping the crowd in a sense of peace that felt earned. But not for Rook. Something shifted. It was barely a flicker in the current of movement, like a ripple against the natural flow of a stream. A break in rhythm. Unnatural. Wrong. Rook's ears twitched. He lifted his head from the grass slowly, nose turning toward the perimeter of the crowd. Dozens of scents swirled in the breeze, sweet, smoky, familiar. But beneath them, faint and sharp, was something else, a scent that didn't belong. Then came the movement. A man, mid-40s, average build, wearing a ball cap low over his brow, walked quickly along the edge of the park. He wasn't with anyone. Didn't look up, moved against the flow of foot traffic like he didn't even realize he was part of a crowd. But Rook noticed something else. His left hand was inside his coat. Tense, not casual, not cold, holding. Rook stood, no bark, no whine, but every muscle went rigid. His pupils shrank, his breath slowed, the predator part of him awakened. A child skipped in front of the man, and for half a second his hand shifted inside the coat. Rook saw the outline. Small, squared. Eliza, sitting on the blanket a few feet away, felt the weight of his shift and turned just in time to see him lock his body like a statue. "Rook," she whispered, reaching out. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. His gaze never left the man. Across the square, the mayor was taking another photo beside the donation board. Beside him, a young woman was lifting her toddler up to touch one of the hand-cut hearts. The singer was beginning the opening chords of another ballad. No one was watching the perimeter, except the dog. The miracle dog. The man moved again closer now, toward the stage, toward the mayor. His walk wasn't erratic. It was deliberate, measured. But that left hand never left his coat, and his jaw tightened like someone reciting something silently. Rook stepped forward, teeth barely bared, his growl so low it vibrated through the grass. Still, no one noticed, until the man glanced his way. Just a flick of the eye. But it was enough. The mask slipped, a moment of startle, then quick calculation, and the man turned his face away and picked up pace. Rook lunged, not in attack yet, but fast enough to draw gasps from the small cluster of people nearby. Someone dropped a cup. Another backed away. "Eliza," said a voice behind her, "what's wrong with your dog?" But she wasn't listening. She saw the man, too, now. The way he was gripping his coat tighter, and how he didn't stop walking. A woman near the fountain noticed Rook moving like a missile low to the ground, head fixed, hackles raised, and said sharply, "Is he trained to bite?" "He's trained to know danger," Eliza replied without thinking, already scooping Rowan into her arms. The man had nearly reached the foot of the stage when he turned sharply, but he wasn't looking at the performers. He was staring at the mayor, one hand still hidden, one step closer. Then Rook barked, sharp, piercing, not warning, calling. People turned. The mayor paused mid-sentence. Security casual. Off-duty officers in polos looked up, confused. Then the man shoved someone aside and reached into his coat, but he never made it. Rook launched, full speed, silent, surgical. The crowd barely registered what was happening until the two bodies collided, dog and man, tumbling into a spray of limbs, denim, and snarled muscle. The object clattered to the concrete and slid several feet. A handgun. Screams tore through the air. A child cried. Vendors ducked behind their carts. The mayor was pulled off stage. And still Rook held fast, teeth locked onto the man's wrist, just hard enough to stop movement, but not enough to maim. One of the off-duty officers tackled from behind, pinning the suspect as another retrieved the weapon. "Clear!" someone shouted. The square buzzed in chaos, but in the center of it, Rook stood, silent, chest heaving, eyes sharp. The crowd parted around him, stunned into silence. It was only when Eliza walked forward, holding Rowan tight, that he finally looked up. His tail didn't wag. He didn't pant or puff. He simply stepped between them again. A line in the grass. Protector. Still. Later, when asked how they knew something was wrong, no one could explain it. No one saw the man clearly until it was nearly too late. No one heard what Rook did. But he did. And again, without orders, without command, he chose to act. For one split second, everything stopped. The wind that had rustled the tent flaps a moment ago stilled. The music halted mid-chord. The little girl with cotton candy paused with her mouth open, unaware that her next breath would never carry the same innocence. And then the man drew the gun. He yanked it free from the inside of his coat, hand trembling, eyes locked with something no one else could see. Whether it was rage, delusion, or grief that fueled him, no one would know. But Rook knew enough. It wasn't hesitation, it was intent. There was no bark this time, no warning, only action. The moment the weapon cleared fabric, Rook launched, not from the ground, from the stage, from center spotlight, a silent missile of muscle and memory. The crowd screamed as if the air had been slashed open, time warped. A woman dropped her drink. A father dove over his daughter. The mayor's aide froze, paralyzed by the sight of the barrel being raised, and Rook collided with the man mid-lift. The weapon fired once, upward, into nothing but sky. Rook hit him square in the chest, front legs extended, body curved like a spring unwound. The man flew backward, crashing into the mulch by the edge of the stage, the gun knocked from his hand and skittering across the grass. Dust and leaves exploded in all directions. The man tried to twist, to reach. But Rook was already on him, teeth bared, shoulders hunched, a statue of threat. Off-duty officers surged forward. Two pinned the man's arms. Another kicked the gun away. A fourth called it in. Everything blurred, the voices, the crowd, the smell of fear rising like heat from the pavement. And in the middle of it all, Rook stood unmoving, not panting, not growling, just watching the man, eyes locked on the same way they once had in alleys and crack house stairwells and war zones, wearing nothing but a handler's voice for armor. But now, no voice guided him. No handler gave the order. Just instinct, just choice. A medic who had been manning the first aid tent dropped to his knees near the suspect, checked for injuries, looked up at the officers. Clean takedown, nothing broken. He's lucky. Eliza stood frozen in place, Rowan curled into her chest, her little face tucked into the crook of Eliza's neck. The girl didn't cry, didn't even tremble, only clung. The echo of the gunshot still rang in Eliza's ears, but louder than that was one thought. It would have hit the mayor, or the girl standing by the fountain, or the singer in the blue dress. Someone would have died, and the only thing that stopped it was a dog who once lived in the shadows of forgotten alleys. When the man was finally cuffed and led away, the silence broke into scattered applause, first hesitant, then rippling, then a standing wave of cheers. "Is that the same dog?" someone asked. "The storm dog? The one with the baby?" Eliza felt hands on her shoulder. People trying to thank her, ask her, record her. But all she could look at was him, Rook, standing atop the spot where the man had fallen. Not triumphant, not proud, just still, as if waiting for someone to tell him it was over. It was Rowan who moved first. She squirmed from Eliza's arms, toddling forward on unsteady legs, straight toward the dog. The crowd hushed again. One breath. Two. Rowan placed her small hand against Rook's side, like pressing it to a heartbeat. He turned his head, just slightly. And then he sat. Later, the headlines would run wild. "Hero Dog Stops Gunman at Community Fundraiser." Guardian dog saves lives again. Miracle in Midwestern town. Photos would show the moment the suspect was tackled. The blur of fur in midair. Rowan's hand resting on Rook's side. The vest that read, "Miracle Dog," shining in the flash bulb light. But none of them captured what Eliza saw. A creature who had once been discarded, now stood between life and death, and chose life. Not out of duty, but love. And when the reporters came, asking her for quotes, Eliza said only this: "He wasn't trained for this. Not anymore. He just refused to let it happen." The envelope came on a Wednesday. No return address, no postmark, just her name, handwritten in block letters that seemed unsure of themselves. Eliza Monroe. She found it tucked between the electric bill and a coupon flyer, quiet, unassuming. But something in her chest tightened when she picked it up. Paper doesn't usually hum with the weight of memory, but this one did. Inside was a single folded page. No greeting, no signature. Only lines pressed so hard into the paper the ink had bled. She waited until Rowan was asleep, curled up with a stuffed fox and the blanket her neighbor had knit. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Rook lay on the rug nearby, his chin on his paws, the light casting soft gold into the gray at his muzzle. She cleared her throat once, then again, and began to read aloud. "I don't know who you are, but I saw the video. The one with the baby. The one where he leapt off the stage. That's him. That's Rook. That's my dog." Eliza looked up, but Rook didn't move. Only his ears twitched slightly. "He saved me. More times than I deserved. Cleared rooms before I entered them. Stood between me and guns. Sniffed out bombs no one else caught. Took a bullet for me once, right shoulder. It never healed right. He didn't even flinch." Eliza's eyes shimmered, but she kept going. "I was the last one he looked at when the order came to disband the unit. Budget cuts, paperwork, numbers. That's all it took to erase what we were. They said they'd find him a home. They said he'd be fine. I believed them. I let them take him." She stopped there, swallowed hard. The silence in the room was soft but aching. Outside, a wind brushed the shutters gently, like someone pressing their hand to the past. Rook hadn't lifted his head. Just listened. For months, I asked. For weeks, I called. Then I stopped. Maybe I wanted to forget. Maybe I thought if I didn't look, I wouldn't feel the weight. But the truth is, I knew. I left him. A log popped in the fire. Rook blinked but didn't move. His body lay still, stretched toward the warmth, but his eyes held open. Eliza's voice cracked as she read the next part. "When I saw him on the news, dragging that box through the storm, I wanted to believe he'd forgiven me. But dogs don't do forgiveness the way we do. They just keep loving, even after you've broken them." She stopped reading. The page trembled in her hands. So did her breath. She looked over at him. This battered shadow of a once polished warrior, now stretched out before a fire that had replaced gunfire. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't turned. But his eyes, they didn't blink. They didn't close. They just stared into the flames like they saw something no one else could. Eliza reached over, her fingers brushing the worn fur between his shoulders. He didn't move, but she whispered anyway. "He heard you," she said. "Even if you're too much a coward to sign your name, he heard you." She folded the letter carefully, pressing the paper like it contained someone's confession, not just guilt, but grief. Then, with trembling fingers, she tucked it into the drawer beside her chair. Not hidden, just waiting. Later that night, long after the fire had died down and the moon had risen over the frost-glinted trees, Eliza awoke to the soft sound of movement. Rook had shifted. He now lay not by the hearth, but by Rowan's crib, not guarding, just present, like always, like before. And though his eyes were older now and his breath came with a faint wheeze, he watched her sleep with the kind of stillness that could only come from loyalty too deep for words. She sat on the edge of her bed watching him for a while, and for the first time, she didn't see him as rescued. She saw him as unfinished. A dog not looking for a home, but still looking for meaning. And maybe, just maybe, he had found it again. The snow outside the cabin had thickened into a silent veil. Inside, the fire had dimmed, casting flickers of amber across Rook's fur as he slept at the foot of Rowan's crib. His body, curled tight, looked peaceful until the twitch began, not of rest, of memory. His paws jerked, a breath caught in his throat, a low, strangled whimper, then a growl, quiet, guttural, from somewhere far deeper than instinct. Because not all ghosts howl, some return as commands. Flashback. Fort Polk. August sun, brutal and blinding. The ground baked into hard-packed clay beneath his paws. A man's voice barked, "Down!" Rook dropped instantly. "Stay." The heat soaked through his chest. Dust clung to his fur. A bee landed on his eye and crawled across the lashes. He didn't flinch. Not until, "Attack!" He lunged, precision and power fused, teeth locked on the padded arm of the decoy trainer. A gunshot cracked the air. He didn't stop. Not until the voice returned, "Out!" Only then did he release. Tail still high, ears cocked, panting, waiting, always waiting. That was the rhythm of his world. Command, action, eye contact, reward, repeat. But it was him, the handler, who changed that world from programming to purpose. Jake. His scent was sweat, motor oil, and black coffee. His laugh was rare, but Rook learned to chase it. His silence? That was the real command. When Jake was quiet, something was wrong and Rook would search until he found it. Together, they cleared buildings, sniffed out threats, and learned each other's scars without needing to name them. Jake once whispered, after a raid gone bad, "You're the only one who doesn't lie to me." Rook didn't understand the words, but he understood the weight behind them. The mission that broke him wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no final stand, just a room. And the wrong scent. It was supposed to be a warehouse sweep. Routine. But something sharp stung Rook's nose the second they entered. He growled once, just once, low. A pulse of warning. Jake didn't listen. The floor beneath them gave way, fire licked up the walls, and the explosion that followed shattered concrete and bone alike. Rook dragged him out, one boot at a time. The medic said later it was a miracle Jake had survived, and that should have been enough, but weeks passed. Jake was discharged, injured, on meds. Rook was reassigned, temporarily, they said, but the voice never came again. Just cold floors, cold cages, a new handler who smelled of cigarettes and didn't look him in the eye. Less missions, more drills, fewer words, no name. One day, they walked him into a van. He turned back, looked for Jake, sniffed the air, nothing familiar. The door closed, the engine hummed, and no one said, "Stay." But he did, Anyway, back to present. The wind rattled the window pane. Rook stirred, breath catching in his throat again. Eliza, from the armchair, noticed. She rose slowly, crossed the room barefoot, and knelt beside him. "Still there, huh?" she whispered. His eyes flicked open. No fear, just a quiet readiness, as if he wasn't sure whether he'd return to this moment or if she was part of the dream. She ran a hand down his side, felt the ridge where old burns never healed smooth, the divot on his shoulder, the twitch in his leg when thunder rolled. "He trained you to be brave," she said softly, "but no one taught you how to rest." Outside, Rowan stirred once in her crib. Rook rose, moved toward her, not fast, not eager, just certain. He lay beside her bed again, resting his chin against the baseboard, waiting, not for a command, just for the sound of a breath. And in that moment, Eliza finally understood. Rook never stopped serving. He had simply changed missions, from war zones to nursery floors, from handler to infant, from orders to instinct, from abandonment to a promise he made in silence and never broke. Late spring sunlight spilled through the windows in slow, dappled patches, the kind of light that didn't shout but whispered of warmth. It drifted across the living room rug where Rowan stood, barefoot, soft curls stuck to her forehead with milk and mischief. Eliza was in the kitchen, humming, hands in dough. And Rook. Rook was exactly where he always was. Not at the door, not guarding a gate, but right beside the child, who had never once commanded him, only trusted him. His head rested on his paws. His body was still, but his eyes never closed fully. Watchful, present. He'd learned the sound of her footsteps, the soft slap of heel, the shuffle of socks, the occasional topple that sent Eliza rushing in with open arms. But this time, there was no fall, no cry, just something else, something new. "Rue, K." It came like breath and intention wrapped in the same syllable, uneven but unmistakable. Rook. He lifted his head, ears perked, tail stilled. The toddler stood 3 feet from him, arms open wide for balance, wobbling slightly. But it was her eyes that mattered, locked on his, and her smile, like sunrise over still water. "Rook," she said again, giggling now, this time with certainty. From the kitchen, Eliza froze. The spoon in her hand clattered into the mixing bowl. She turned slowly, breath caught in her throat. Rowan had said words before, scattered syllables, nonsense songs to the wind, cooing sounds she made for toys or the fireplace. But this wasn't that. This was a name. Given. And meant. Rook blinked. He stood, gently, as if afraid sudden movement would break the moment like glass. He took one slow step forward, then another, and Rowan, in all her brave unsteadiness, waddled the last 2 steps and tumbled against his chest, arms clutching as far around his shoulders as she could reach. She didn't need to say it again, but she did. Rook. He didn't know what the word meant, but he knew how it felt. And somehow that mattered more, because for the first time since he lost his unit, his purpose, his name, he had one again. Not from a commander, not barked in urgency, but offered in the tiny, trembling voice of someone who saw him, not as broken, not as dangerous, not as leftover, but as hers. Eliza stood in the doorway, hand to her mouth, trying not to cry. The sight of them, dog and girl, curled into each other like they'd grown that way was too much. She walked forward slowly, kneeling beside them. Rowan looked up at her, face beaming. "Mama," the child said, as if naming her too, then turned back to the shepherd and rested her head against his chest. "Rook." The dog didn't move for a long time. He only breathed. And for a creature who had once been trained to obey, to fight, to survive, this quiet acceptance felt like the highest mission he'd ever been given. That night, Eliza wrote it on a tag and slid it onto the collar he now wore without resistance. Guardian, brother, miracle. She fastened it gently and kissed the top of his head. "You deserve to be called something that means something again," she whispered. He didn't lift his head, but his tail tapped once against the floor, and in the crib beside them, Rowan sighed in her sleep, peaceful, whole, and never alone. The pen hovered above the line for a second too long. Eliza's hand trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of the moment. The adoption papers would simply confirm what had already been true for a long time. Love made permanent. Beside her, Rook sat still as stone, ears attuned to her breath. No urging, no movement, just present. Ms. Garner, the social worker, watched quietly. She'd seen many adoptions, but never one like this. A woman smelling faintly of antiseptic and firewood, a German shepherd sentry at her feet, and a baby sleeping peacefully nearby. Eliza signed, Eliza Monroe. Tears brimmed, not sadness, but relief. "I thought I was done with mothering, with waiting for the world to need me," she whispered. Looking at Rook, she added, "Turns out I was just in the wrong kind of war." Ms. Garner smiled. "We don't often approve arrangements like this, taking both an infant and a service dog." Eliza nodded. "He's not just a dog. And she's not just a baby." Rowan stirred. Rook moved immediately, curling beside her like a comma in a sentence already finished. "She wasn't saved," Eliza said quietly. "She was claimed by him, and she claimed him back." The final stamp echoed in the quiet room. Adoption finalized. Rowan Monroe, daughter, protected, home. Outside, sunlight gently warmed the world. Eliza rubbed Rook's ear. "We were a family before the paper said so." As they left, a flyer fluttered down at their feet. "Foster failing is just another word for forever." She smiled. "Forever it is, then." Rook wagged his tail just once, but enough. Later came the storm. The sky turned green, thunder rolling in like a memory. Rowan clung to Rook, burying her face in his fur. He stayed utterly still, more sentinel than dog. Eliza crouched beside them, seeing it clearly for the first time. His stillness wasn't fear, it was memory. He'd known storms like this before, on streets slick with rain, and worse. "You don't freeze because you're afraid," she whispered, hand resting on his ribs. "You freeze because you remember." Rowan pressed closer to him, finding courage in his calm. Eliza pulled a blanket around them all. The storm could rage. Inside their circle, there was only breath and the strength of staying still together. When spring returned, Eliza opened a shoebox of memories, clippings, notes, photos, a reminder of what Rook had survived. She asked herself, how many more are still out there? That question birthed a mission. Forms were filed. The old red barn was booked. Friends, nurses, and a retired canine trainer offered help. The first hand-painted sign went up, the Rowan and Rook Foundation, where the forgotten get a second chance. Its symbol, a child's handprint beside a dog's paw. The mission, rescue service dogs abandoned after duty or injury, and create a safe space for foster children with trauma. No cages, no cold metal, just open fields, soft beds, and healing written together. Rook became the blueprint, quietly leading, never demanding. When a new arrival trembled, it was Rook who lay nearby, offering presence instead of pressure. One evening, Eliza watched Rowan stack stones near Rook's paws. "She doesn't remember the storm," she whispered, "but I do. She doesn't remember being left, but I remember who stayed." They hadn't saved the world, but they had saved a world. And from that storm, a sanctuary had risen, not of walls or paperwork, but of patience and presence. Eliza traced the letters on the sign. "Rowan and Rook, you saved each other," she added softly. "And you saved me." In the field, children and dogs played, each with scars, and now each with something else. A reason to stay, a name that mattered, a home where storms might come, but love stayed. The yard felt wider now, not because it had grown, but because Rowan had. 5 years old, full of knees, wild curls, and a laugh that bounced off the barn walls. Beside her moved Rook. His coat had faded, silver threading through dark fur. He no longer leapt fences or chased butterflies. But every morning when Rowan stepped outside, he rose, joints stiff, pace slower, but always he rose. The Rowan and Rook Foundation had grown 2 more volunteers, more rescues. But their story stayed the quiet heartbeat of it all. No press, no cameras, just the girl and the dog who kept choosing her. They walked the perimeter, Rowan in red boots, carrying a stick like a scepter, pointing at wildflowers. "That one's for Molly," she said. Rook flicked an ear at the name. Molly was new shy, limping, wary, but accepted because Rowan accepted her first. At the old tree stump, the watchpost, Rowan climbed, surveying the land. "Everything looks safe today." Rook gave a low woof, almost a sigh. She rested a hand on his head. "You still remember, don't you?" He stayed still. She whispered, "Me too." Inside, Eliza watched from the kitchen. Her breath caught, not in sadness, but in the ache of knowing time slips by gently, surely. That night, Rowan tucked a blanket around Rook. "Good night, Captain." He groaned contentedly, paws twitching. Eliza saw the small tremor in his hind leg, the kind that stays. Later, she knelt beside him, stroking his neck. "You're slowing down, but she doesn't care. You're her miracle. Stay as long as you want." Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, a girl dreamed of running across fields with a dog who dreamed too of the first cry in the storm, of the heartbeat he chose to guard. It was autumn, late afternoon. The oak tree cast long shadows. On a blanket beneath it, Rowan read aloud from a worn book. Rook lay beside her, his body curved protectively, chest rising and falling slow. She reached out, hand on his side, not out of habit, but knowing. Time wasn't moving forward. It was looping. And the dog never left the boy's side, not even when the stars got closer to the ground. She stopped, looked at him, right into him. His eyes weren't as sharp, but still held recognition, not of name, not of voice, but of bond. You remember that storm? She asked softly. You pulled me out. I didn't even know how to cry right. His tail brushed her ankle. She smiled, resting her head on his neck. You found me. I'll always find you, too. Eliza watched from the kitchen. She didn't speak or take pictures, just let the moment exist. The next page of the book flipped open on its own, a blank page. No ending, Rowan murmured, then smiled. Good. We'll write it together. That night, beneath Rook's blanket, she slipped a drawing, a girl, a dog, a tall woman, and a tree. Underneath, my first family. On the back, smaller, I'll find you. Even if I have to go back through the storm. Spring came, not by calendar, but by feel. The yard smelled of hope. Rowan fell asleep beneath the oak. Rook curved around her, instinct more than choice. Eliza watched from the porch, knowing some moments don't ask to be witnessed. The wind moved through the branches. No storm, no sirens, just breath and birdsong. Rook's ribcage rose and fell with the breeze, slower but steady. Eliza remembered the night they came, half alive and all wrong for each other. And yet, here they were. No commands, no cages, just family. Rowan murmured in her sleep. Rook sighed in response. Eliza sat on the porch steps, her mug forgotten. From there she saw it all. The fields, the swing, the paw prints worn into dirt where Rook had once paced. He didn't pace anymore. He didn't need to. The sun dipped low, casting sacred light. Eliza whispered, "Let this be enough." The oak creaked as if it heard, and the wind carried only peace. This was what came after survival, not a miracle, not a headline, just home. The town square had never held this kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of grief, nor the hush before a parade. It was the kind that comes when hearts align, when people collectively remember that not all heroes walk upright. They had gathered in front of the old courthouse. Families, officers, nurses, school children. Even the mayor stood at the front, his voice steady but low as he opened the ceremony. Rows of folding chairs stretched beneath fluttering flags. The breeze carried the scent of lilac and rain-washed stone. In the center stood a podium wrapped in blue ribbon, and beside it an empty cushion embroidered with one word, Guardian. Rook lay at Eliza's feet, his fur brushed, his vest polished but faded. The words, Miracle Dog, had begun to peel along the seams. He didn't wear medals. He didn't need to. But today, the town had chosen to honor him anyway. Rowan sat on Eliza's hip, now older, her small hand grasping the back of Rook's neck. She didn't fidget. She didn't giggle. She just watched. Like she understood. Like she remembered everything, even the parts she was too young to name. When the mayor stepped back, Eliza walked forward. She wasn't used to microphones. Her voice cracked on the first word. She didn't apologize. Instead, she looked down at the dog who had once curled around a foam box in the rain, and began. I was a nurse. I've seen triage tents in war zones, and I've seen miracles die in hospital beds. But I've never seen anything like this dog. She paused. Not for effect, but to breathe. He wasn't trained to save lives. He wasn't following a command. He just refused to stop. The crowd held still. A man in uniform lowered his head. He didn't belong to anyone. No badge, no handler, no paperwork, just scars. And a choice. Her voice softened. He chose her, a newborn girl left to the cold. And somehow, that made all of us braver. An officer stepped forward then, holding a small box. He knelt beside Rook and opened it gently. Inside lay a medal, the National Animal Bravery Commendation. It shimmered not with gold, but with humility, a paw print engraved in its center, a single word along the ribbon, valor. The officer didn't pin it to Rook's vest. Instead, he placed it on the cushion beside him, like offering it, rather than awarding it. Rook blinked once, then twice, and lay his head beside the medal. No applause followed, only the sound of Rowan whispering, "Good boy," as her fingers curled around his fur. Eliza stepped back, but before she left the stage, she leaned down, pressing her forehead gently to Rook's. Her voice didn't reach the microphone this time, but those close enough heard. "They gave you a medal, old boy." But we already knew. The breeze picked up again, soft, steady, carrying through the crowd and into the distance, as if the world itself exhaled, not in celebration, but in gratitude. The ceremony faded into memory like soft music after a dance. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Something had shifted. That evening, dusk draped the hills like an old quilt. Crickets began their chorus. The last blush of sun kissed the barn roof. The world exhaled just a little slower. Out back, beneath the oak tree where stories had been read and oaths had been whispered, Rook lay in the grass. His breathing was deep but faint, like waves withdrawing from shore. The medal hadn't been moved, still beside him, still untouched. He didn't need it to know. Rowan walked barefoot through the grass, her stuffed lamb tucked under one arm. Her hair still smelled of chamomile shampoo and cinnamon cookies. She didn't say a word as she approached. She didn't have to. Rook lifted his head slightly, his cloudy eyes finding her like they always did, no matter where she was in the world. His ears twitched at her steps. He didn't rise. He didn't need to. She lay down beside him, knees curled inward like the first night in the old cabin. Back then, he was the warmth she didn't understand. Now she was the calm his body leaned into. "Stay, okay?" Her voice cracked on the second word. Just enough. She didn't cry. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, felt his huff, warm and low, like a sigh from the earth itself. His body didn't move much anymore, but his presence, it filled the whole yard. Eliza watched from the porch, arms crossed, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She hadn't lit the lantern. Some moments weren't meant to be interrupted by artificial light. Tears pooled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them, didn't move. She just whispered into the air, "Take your time, old friend." Rowan traced a finger along his fur gray now, thinned with age, but still his. She hummed the tune she always sang to her dolls, off-key, half forgotten. It didn't matter. He blinked slowly, then settled. A breeze rustled the oak leaves above them. One leaf let go, drifted down, landed softly beside them. "Remember when I used to fit in your ribs?" she asked softly. "And you'd wrap around me like a circle?" Rook didn't move, but she felt the twitch in his paw. Memory, perhaps, or muscle, or love. The stars came out one by one, quiet, patient witnesses. Fireflies blinked in the brush. An owl hooted in the distance, but beneath the tree, it was just them. Just a girl and her dog. A circle of years wrapped into stillness. Rowan whispered again, this time slower. "You don't have to stay, but I really, really want you to." He let out one soft breath, a puff of warmth against her cheek. the kind of breath that says, "I hear you, I remember, I'm here." And with that, Rook closed his eyes, not in pain, not in fear, just peace. The earth was soft that morning. Spring had arrived not with fanfare, but with dew on petals and sun that lingered a little longer each day. A gentle hush settled over the yard, as if even the wind had slowed its steps out of respect. Rowan knelt beneath the old oak tree, her hands covered in rich soil. The grass around her glowed a tender green, kissed by light. Next to her lay a half-empty tray of marigolds and lavender, simple things, hearty things, the kind that stayed even when seasons changed. She pressed her palms into the dirt, not just to plant, but to remember. A few feet away, 3 rescue puppies tumbled over one another in the wild joy only young dogs knew. Their barks were shrill, their tails wagged recklessly. One had a spot over its eye. Another still had its shelter tag dangling loosely from its collar. The smallest one had a limp but didn't seem to notice. They chased butterflies, chewed sticks, rolled in clover. But when Rowan stood up, every single one of them turned to look. And then, like instinct, they ran to her. She smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a stranger, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper. A place full of years, of memory, of nights by a fireplace and first words spoken in a hush. Rowan crouched down and hugged the smallest pup, who nestled right into the crook of her arm. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. The puppy licked her chin and closed its eyes. She turned to the oak tree, where the ground had been shaped into a small, circular flower bed. The plaque was simple, hand-carved. Rook, guardian, brother, forever. No birth date, no end date, because he never really left. "You're still here, Rook," she said gently, brushing soil from her hands. "You always will be." A petal fell from the branch above her and landed at her feet. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Inside the house, the kettle whistled faintly. Eliza, older now, hair streaked silver, stood at the window watching. She didn't interrupt, didn't call Rowan in. Some silences were sacred. Across the fence line, kids were arriving for their volunteer shift at the Rowan and Rook Foundation. Backpacks on shoulders, clipboards in hand, excitement in their steps. A few of them paused to wave toward the tree. One boy even bowed his head. He didn't know why. He just did. Rowan sat back in the grass, arms resting on her knees. The puppies collapsed beside her in a pile of soft fur and trust. She looked at them, not as replacements, not as distractions, but as echoes. Echoes of a love that taught her how to be whole. Echoes of a loyalty that stayed, even after heartbeat ceased. Somewhere, wind moved through the oak leaves. The same wind that once wrapped a baby in a box. The same wind that watched a dog refuse to leave. Now it carried forward a legacy, not carved in stone or shouted from rooftops, but grown quietly, like roots under earth. Not everyone believes in angels, but some come with pause, and they never stop watching. In a world often too loud to hear the quiet acts of loyalty, Rook's story reminds us that love doesn't need words. It just needs presence. He wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a witness to pain, and ultimately, a reason for healing. From the rain-soaked alley to the warmth of a family, Rook's journey is a testament to what happens when we choose to see value in the forgotten. German shepherds like Rook are more than their training. They are hearts wrapped in fur, resilient, intuitive, and fiercely loyal. Their love doesn't waver when things get hard. They don't ask for much. only the chance to matter to someone. This story is not just about rescue, it's about being rescued right back, about how a discarded life, whether canine or human, can still carry purpose, still create change, and how sometimes the greatest heroes walk on four legs. Let it remind us, when we open our homes to animals, we're not just saving them, we're saving something in ourselves. In every bark, every wag, every silent vigil by the crib, there's a message. You are not alone, you are worth protecting, and love, once given, never really leaves.